Hi everyone, thanks again for joining us for the NVM Express hosted webinar, NVMe Compliance Program, Preparing to Test New Features. Today I'd like to introduce our presenter, Carter Snay from UNH-IOL, who is a technical manager in data center technologies, focused on testing and customer relations. He has over 5 years of experience working with NVMe technology. I'm going to pass it to Carter in a moment here, but we will have a Q&A at the end if folks would like to submit questions as they come through. And with that, I'll pass it on to Carter.
Great, thank you, Meg. So as she said, I'm Carter Snay. I work for the UNH-IOL, and some of you might be familiar with who we are, but for those who are not, I just wanted to give a little overview. So as the name suggests, we are a business under the University of New Hampshire. So as a result, our primary workforce, those who are running the testing, developing scripts, building our hardware that we use for our testing, and some interactions with vendors, are young engineers learning the ropes, and our students at UNH, building new connections, which is great for them to get invested into this new technology. Of course, sometimes there are some mistakes going on, but they're all managed through staff, and we all work together to make sure that we get the best product possible in the end. So the IOL, it does cover, while we're covering data center technologies here for NVMe, we also cover different industries such as embedded systems, baseband, IP, DSL, open source, and many other industries. So you might have seen some UNH-IOL staff and other standards bodies as well trying to learn information there and help develop new test services there. Specifically for NVMe, we've been doing this since 2013 and now doing it in 2023. It's great to be doing it for the last decade. Just based on this slide, you can see we are based in New Hampshire, in Durham, right outside the UNH campus, and we're 100% funded by commercial industry, not through the university at all. And we host our own plug test as well, which is what that bottom picture is. So it's a big group test events that we can all come together and try to get the most out of our equipment. So with UNH-IOL and NVM Express organizations specifically, like I said, we've been working together for the last 10 years. And as during this 10-year time period, we've been the testing lab to be certifying NVMe conformant devices. So with that, we test NVMe SSDs, hosts, switches, and targets across all current transports that have NVMe technical specifications. So doing this for a while. By working with the NVMe org, we developed test plans that I'll talk about a little bit later, but they are implemented into our software, IOL Interact, which you can see in the middle of the screen. We're constantly updating the software, not only with minor tweaks and bug fixes like any software has, but also by adding anywhere between 50 to 150 new tests every 6 months based on latest technical proposals that are ratified by the NVMe organization. This software, some of you might already have some experience with, is provided to all UNH-IOL NVMe members in order for them to pre-test with it and find potential firmware bugs or issues, so that way they can send it to us after that for official certification testing in a neutral third-party environment to be certified as an NVMe SSD. When the new software is released biannually, so every 6 months, we host PlugFests at the UNH-IOL, which I talked about just a second ago, which usually hosts either in our group test area or virtually in some cases. And this is the first opportunity to certify with the latest test plan that I'll be talking about in a little bit. So the origin of the specification and the importance of testing for us at the IOL. So like I said before, we've been doing this for the last decade, and we've seen a lot of changes going on as this technology matures. Especially when this test service first launched, we were only testing the PCIe transport, as that was really the only transport that technology was built on. But now it's gone far beyond just testing an SSD over a PCIe bus. There are several transports that we're testing, and there's also newly emerging command sets just beyond NVM and the administrative command set that are happening every year. So we're trying to implement tests for these as they come out. So we know we're doing all this testing, but why? We need to make sure that these devices just work. So something that I like to explain when you have a new hire, new student, when they don't really totally understand the point of this testing since they don't have the context yet, is I like to think of it like if you're trying to build a computer or you're trying to upgrade your computer, you don't want to worry that an SSD you want to purchase won't work because you have a certain type of motherboard, so that way you'd have to buy a whole new system just to have a new SSD work properly. And then that goes all the way up to the hyperscale level. They don't want to have to buy thousands of dollars or millions of dollars worth of new equipment for the same reason. So as the slide says, when you get the new equipment you want, it should just work. And we are here to make sure that it does. So if you're behind the scenes of the NVMe technical work group, you know that there's constant innovation and discussion going on all the features and updates that are going into final specification documents, much like any other technology at this level. The UNH-IOL attends these meetings, listens to the discussions to determine the highest priority technical proposals to write the tests for. So we write these test cases, as you can see here listed on the left, the test plans. These are all implemented based on the technical proposals that we see going on in the NVMe technical work group. We seek vendor input and feedback when choosing these technical proposals, so we can be sure to be testing the features that are being highly implemented and require testing. We work with the NVMe Interop and Compliance Committee, where we discuss the changes to be made, updates that are going into the test plan, and give anonymous statuses of the testing and the features that we are seeing in the field. And here's just a good representation of kind of what I was talking about previously, about how we have different test plans going on, and updates, those. So like I said, there's massive updates to the test plan every 6 months, where we're adding something between 50 to 150 new tests to keep up with the standards body and new features and test requirements that are being put into the specifications. These occur in 3-phase processes, just like other technical proposals do during or in the NVMe technical work group. So for us, phase 1 is the identification of the technical proposals that we think or believe are the highest priority to implement test cases for, and we present this to the technical work group. Phase 2 is where we pull the actual test case or test possibilities from these technical proposals, looking for operative words like shall or must to make sure that the device implements these behaviors, as well as we also are adding functional tests where we send specific commands that utilize the new features, such as flexible data placement, which is going on in the next test plan, which we'll talk about next. Phase 3 is where the rubber really meets the road, where we actually implement the or we actually write test case procedures and then implement that in the software that I talked about before. All new test cases are FYI, which means they're not required to pass to be certified, for the device to be certified. And this is to allow vendors to see if a device is conformant, or perhaps if the test plan or test script needs some updates, or if it needs to be amended due to a specification misunderstanding. If there are enough passes on a new FYI test between different manufacturers, then we can have the evidence to make sure or determine that the test should move from FYI to mandatory, which is when it would be required to pass in order to be put onto a certification listing. So that certification listing is the NVMe integrators list, which is hosted on the UNH-IOL website, but it is the NVMe's list. So this is just what it looks like, although right there it says V18. Now there's V19 because we just had our version 19.0 Plugfest last week, and there are some postings going on there as we speak. So this is what the whole end goal of the testing is to get onto this list, showing that the device is conformant to the NVMe specifications based on the test plan that is the same version as the list, so version 18 or version 19. It goes all the way back to 1, so it's a pretty big list at this point. So here's just a visual of the actual process to get onto the integrators list. So step 1 is become part of the NVM Express organization. So that's why you can see all the technical proposals and everything going on if you're not already. Then the second step is becoming part of the UNH-IOL NVMe testing service. So I just want to make sure that it's known that joining NVM Express is not the same as joining with the UNH-IOL testing service. So those are two different entities. But once you are part of the UNH-IOL NVMe testing service, then you can get the Interact compliance software, do the actual testing in lab before you send it off to us. Then you'd be able to schedule testing with us through me or one of my colleagues, send the equipment, and then we will do the actual independent testing here in New Hampshire and determine whether to pass or fail and send out logs or results or anything that we need in order to get the devices close to passing as possible if they're not passing. And then assuming that all the pre-testing has been done properly and the device is passing with no unexpected failures, we would then be able to present this in a finalized report or several reports, and after that, list on the integrators list at the vendor's request. So we don't have to list if we don't want to, or if you don't want to, sorry. We can wait until potentially you're actually trying to market the device or if it's a hidden project, but at some point when it is requested, we can then put it on the integrators list if it has passed. So these are the test tools that we use to actually get onto the integrators list. The top one is Interact PC Edition, which is the primary testing software that we use, which is run on a Linux host, and it automates all the testing that are in the UNH-IOL NVMe conformance test plans. On the bottom left is Teledyne LaCroix's Link Expert, which we use to run the NVMe MI testing. And it also fills in some gaps where the Linux kernel had prevented us from running certain tests because we just couldn't get the granularity that we needed. However, we have been developing our own user space driver that is now in version 19.0 of our tool that does help us with this gap. We're still utilizing the Teledyne LaCroix hardware for the validation of these tests, as well as for NVMe MI. It's worth noting that it is a small subset of tests that are of the NVMe conformance test plan that's in Teledyne LaCroix edition, but it is still based on the same test plan. So I have gotten a lot of questions about the difference between PC edition and LaCroix edition, as far as if there's a test plan for LaCroix versus PC, and they are based on the same exact tests. So there is no difference from that standpoint. It's just the way we actually implemented the test cases. So like I said, we use these to make sure we have as much coverage as possible for the conformance test plans, and Teledyne LaCroix is used for MI. Okay, so that is pretty much the basics of NVMe testing service at the UNH-IOL, how testing is done, and how we determine what to test in the next revision of a test plan, and how we actually do the testing. So now we can discuss what we're working on now and in the near future. So TP 2016, Technical Proposal 2016, just like any other technical proposal that is presented to the technical work group of the NVMe organization, all of our test plans need to be going through this technical proposal phase that I discussed previously. And on this slide are some of the big ones that we are actually writing test cases for now for TP 2016. It's a bit confusing because TP 2016, Technical Proposal 2016, but it's for Test Plan 20. So sometimes we say like TP 20, but then it gets a little, the acronyms get jumbled up. But this is for Test Plan version 20 of the UNH conformance NVMe test plans. So flexible data placement was by far the biggest of the new test cases that were added to Test Plan 20. We have them all written and implemented, but it's not out yet because we're still developing the actual tool. So the point of being able to put these test plans together in a three-phased approach is that between each phase we can have discussions with NVMe members and with anyone who's attending the technical work group meetings, so we can discuss what they think needs to be changed or what they want to have actually going on in the actual tests. So the test plan is being put together in the next 3 weeks, really, after which we'll be posting it to the internal NVMe website for everyone to take a look and ask questions and make suggestions if they have anything or think if it needs to be changed. After which it'll go through voting and board approval, to which then it'll be ratified and then available to the public on the IOL website. The first testing of TP 2016 will happen in November during PlugFest 20, but the actual software version will be released in September to give everyone 2 months in advance to try out these new tests before going for official certifications. So for flexible data placement, we had planned on doing a proof of concept testing in this last PlugFest, although we did not get drives that supported flexible data placement registered for the actual PlugFest. We have had a handful come through that do support it, but they're not trying to go for the flexible data placement testing yet. So it seems we're maybe just a bit ahead on that, and we'll see more filtering in as we go. But you can see from the number in the middle, 60, I said we have 50 to 150 in each test plan added. So 60 of them right there are just flexible data placement. So it is a massive portion of the new test plan that will be coming out. And that is because of the feedback we received, where it seemed like flexible data placement really was the most important and biggest thing going on for our certification needs. So some things that we do are, verifying that, some negative tests, like verify that if FTP is disabled, then we get proper command statuses when we try sending out FTP commands, or certain log pages, making sure that they are enabled when this feature is allegedly supported. So we're verifying that it is all accurate and happening. you can see here we have more test cases that are written as well. So there's, like I said, I mean, there's 60 test cases. So we're, doing proper identify controller valid values, making sure the new flexible data placement events feature 1E is working properly, that namespace management is working when you have flexible data placement, and that we can also get certain error statuses like invalid placement handle list. And for the write commands, the tests are using directive types 1 through 3 and directive specific values to write valid and invalid placement identifiers. So, and write zeros tests. We also have some new tests that will ensure that invalid format is returned when one of two namespaces in an endurance group that share a reclaim unit handle, and one of the namespaces is sent a command to be set to a different user format than the other namespace in the same endurance group, as this is not allowed in the specification. Another one that has several test cases, abort enhancements. So we have to have new tests to try out a cancel command, or making sure we can actually specify abort them in this with this new command, whether it's a single action or multiple actions. And we're also having to do a lot more queues-based testing for this because you abort based on the queue. And this is something that we couldn't previously do just with the Linux default driver, but with the previously mentioned user space driver that we have developed, we are able to do these in our own testing now. Another large one to go after was the should to shall conversion catch-up. So like I said before, a lot of the operative word that we really look for a lot of time is shall, because that is a behavior that must be implemented by an NVMe device, a conformant device. So if we see shall, that's pretty much something we'll pull out in phase 2 of the test plan development process. And when a lot of the shoulds go from should to shall, that means we need to either make sure we have a test that already covers something similar to that, or we make a new test that covers that new test case, that new requirement. There are some times when something goes from shall to should, in which case that requirement gets relaxed, but this is obviously the opposite of that, and we need to make sure that if something was previously a recommendation or something that it should do, and now is a shall or must, that we are capturing that in our test plans. And like I said, some of these are based on previously existing tests, but it should be noted that all test plans are cumulative over the whole length of this ICC effort. So if you went back all the way to test plan 1, you'd see the same tests probably in a few of them from all the way up into 19, that they stay persistent throughout all of them, since some things don't change, or maybe the test cases just need to be modified slightly for new requirements, but at the end it is still a very similar test from the very beginning. And then namespace admin label, this is one of the new features that we're adding to make sure we have proper testing for, that you can actually set it to a UTF-8 character and see that it actually sets properly. And it's a kind of a helpful feature for managers and developers who are trying to know what the namespace is actually its intended uses for, and make sure we can sanitize it properly. And then this ZNS testing over multiple transports. This is something we've been trying to do for a while and have not had a whole lot of uptake in it yet, but we're hoping to get some more ZNS over multiple transports testing going in the near future. Even in our next Plugfest, we're hoping to do a large fabric build with many different vendors through different transports. So we would like to make sure we can do both NVM and admin over these transports, but also be able to do ZNS over multiple transports with new vendor supports, and have a whole large build going on at the UNH-IOL. So this is kind of similar to what we said before, but how to be ready for test certification. So to reiterate, getting the software prior to sending in the device, so you can actually do pre-testing. You get the software from us, from UNH-IOL. Our contacts will be at the end of this, but we have a file share that you download it from, where we periodically upload new versions of the software. So more than just every 6 months. Like I said before, there are also minor releases in between where we're doing those minor tweaks and bug fixes. And then you can also attend the ICC meetings, which occur every other Tuesday. I think I have a slide later on showing when they are and how to get access to them. And this is where we discuss the technical proposals that we're going to be planning on putting into the test plans, and also can discuss potential new tests or new things that you think should be testing. It's the land of all testing for NVMe is what's going on in that group meeting. So what happens if a device fails? I mentioned before that there's mandatory and FYI. So a failure, as far as conformance and certification goes, is a failure is when a mandatory test fails, which means we find a fault in the device's behavior. An FYI failure, as the name suggests, is primarily informational and is to let the tester know that non-conformant behavior has been found and it should be corrected, but it does not prevent certification at that time. If the test does happen to move from FYI to mandatory between a test plan, then if that behavior has not been corrected, then it would be a legit failure that can stop certification from occurring. So that is kind of the methodology between having an FYI versus mandatory and why they change between different test plans. So we've had cases where a drive might be failing on version 19.0 because it's failing a newly made mandatory test, but it would pass for 18.0 because that test was FYI in that iteration of the test plan. So depending on the version that you're hoping to get certified with, will change those features or those statuses of the test case. If testing with us, how quickly can it be corrected? So if you're actually sent the drive to our lab and we're doing this and we find an actual test error, which hopefully we wouldn't because it'd be pre-testing, but if we did find a real error and we discussed it and we found out, yes, this is truly a conformance problem, it can be corrected in the same week of the certification testing, as long as we get a timely shipped firmware to us, and we can just do it with standard tools like the NVMe CLI, and we can update it, verify that the previously failing test passes, and then we would also have to rerun as quickly as possible the previous test to make sure that nothing else was affected. But these unexpected failures can be avoided by pre-testing, like I said before. So by pre-testing, you can catch issues early on, and hopefully before the drive is shipped to New Hampshire, where we receive it and don't find any issues because it's already been pre-tested and everything's already been previously discussed prior to the reservation of the testing. But what if the failure occurs and you think, no, the drive is right, the firmware is right, there's something going wrong in the test. So if this happens, then we're more than happy to discuss where it's possible that there's a disconnect between the script and the test plan or specification requirements. If it's a software issue, then we'll fix the problem as soon as we can for the next release and not mark the test case as a failure in the final reports. It would be marked as a pass with comments, where we would comment that the drive is acting conformantly, doing the right thing, and where the test case was incorrect or doing something wrong. And if it turns out to be a true non-compliance issue, then it's a good thing it was caught and that the software and test plans are doing their jobs. So I mentioned the ICC calls. So this is where you can find a lot of this discussion going on, talking about the new test plans and the statuses of the tests, the FYI versus mandatory, and kind of what we're seeing and what features are being implemented. So it's every other Tuesday. In fact, there's one today in an hour and a half. So if you want to be there, we'll be there. And then here's my contact information because we're getting towards the end of this. So like I said before, technical manager at the UNH-IOL. My personal or work email is on the top. And then you can also email NVMe Lab, which will get in contact with all of us who are working on the NVMe project at the UNH-IOL. And with that, we were opening up for questions.
Thanks, Carter. I have one to get us started, but again, folks, feel free to submit questions into the chat here. But the first question is, how can I ensure the tests are available for the technical proposal that I am writing?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So like I mentioned before, between the different phases of our test plan development, we are presenting everything to the technical work group and the ICC. So at that time, at those moments, it's kind of like a public forum or private forum for NVMe members where you can voice your opinions on something that you want to be tested. So if there's a technical proposal that you are working on and submitted and really want to make sure it's included in the next test plan, that's where you can vocalize your opinion and your thoughts, and we can take that into account and probably implement it.
Thanks, Carter. Next question, can I use other equipment or suites to qualify for the NVMe integrators list?
Okay, so other equipment and suites can be used to check for yourself if a drive is seemingly conformant or making sure that it's actually working properly. But as far as actually getting onto the IOL integrators list, or sorry, the NVMe integrators list hosted by the IOL, it must be run on the IOL produced tools, because these are the ones that have been going through, the decade of testing and going to all the ICC meetings and everything. So in order to be actually put onto NVMe integrators list and be certified conformant to NVMe, it must be through the IOL tools.
Next question, what other command sets are you going to be implementing testing for?
So we're looking to start implementing tests, or start looking into computational storage as the next one. And beyond that, we're still waiting to see what's coming next.
Next question, does the PCIe version affect the certification testing?
So our testing sits above that, so it should not. We do have PCIe transport specific tests that are, because there's the new, not new anymore, but the refactored test or specifications, and there is the PCIe transport NVMe specification. And there are some cases where the actual PCIe spec preempts the NVMe PCIe transport specification, in which case there are some, there might be an unexpected failure from that because a value was set when in the NVMe specification it says to be reserved. So in those cases, we can refer to the PCIe specification, which is allowed in the NVMe transport spec. So based on that, we can make a determination on what is going on, if it should be a pass or failure.
Okay, and then the next question, does the NVMe specification version affect the certification testing?
It does and it doesn't. And by that, I mean some tests are only run if the drive is, for example, 2.0 or higher. But since manufacturers can implement features ahead, so if they're a 1.4 drive or really want to implement a specific 2.0 feature, we can still send the command and see if it works. And if the command comes back unsuccessfully, then we can do a version check based on the identified controller data structure and see like, oh, this drive is 1.4, does not need to support this 2.0 feature, therefore, skip this. It's not required to be implemented. But if a drive is 2.0 and it needs to implement this 2.0 feature, then we'll hold to the fire and say this is a real failure and needs to be implemented and fixed in order to be conformant. But otherwise, if you're, say, 1.1 or 1.3, there are version checks built in and you can still get certified.
Great, and then the next question here, for FDP features, is it possible to get a preliminary list of tests?
It would be possible. You should reach out to the email nvmelab@iol.unh.edu listed before, and then it will be posted soon to the actual the NVMe internal page when we're going through phase 3 reviews. So soon we're actually implementing the test cases, and they'll be posted for everyone to see who's an NVMe member.
Great, and then this one's a little bit more specific here, but essentially the question is, we have a UNH license and the release note says the recommended software is a Teledyne LaCroix PCIe protocol suite 1196 Link Expert 3.96. But essentially this version from mid-2022 is no longer archived at Teledyne. Does the current Teledyne software work with this also, or are there known issues with the current Teledyne software?
That's a good question. So when we're running the testing here, we are running with later versions, so we should definitely update that. It does work with later versions, although we have seen or heard issues with the Z58 and version 18 of our test plan, which does seem to work on version 4.0 or version 11.98. So we have seen some issues going on there, but you should be able to update to version 4.12, which I think is the latest version. At least that's what I have right now. I check usually every other week. So in theory, it should work. If it doesn't, then reach out.
Great. Well, that was actually our last question for today. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you, Carter, for presenting. The presentation will be available on the NVM Express website as a PowerPoint version that folks can download. Additionally, the video recording will be available on Bright Talks as well as the NVM Express YouTube channel. Thank you all so much.